Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. I'm very, very excited about this conversation. I always get excited about conversations that I'm not a part of, and I get to hear for the first time. This is a conversation that you had with a fellow podcaster in the business, and for some reason that I can't remember, I was not able to join. So you had this great conversation. You were happy about it, and I'm just like a listener now. So I'm going to take a seat, wait for the commercial break to pass, and listen to you and this fine gentleman.
Great.
Oh, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks a lot for asking. And Javier and I spoke about a series he did on his podcast called Pretend. And you can check out what he's got going on his website at pretendradio.org. But you can also find him out there on social media. And we spoke about his Grave Detector series, which is about the controversial forensic anthropologist Arpad Vass. And we've spoken about Arpad Vass on these airwaves in the past. And really, you just got to check out Javier's series on the Grave Detector because he digs deep into Arpad's history of inventing these devices that Arpad claims would change the course of crime detecting. And so one angle that is looked at in Javier's series is that if Arpad is full of crap or not. And I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really fitting for our listeners on the Missing Show, because I know we have some families of missing people who listen as well, and I think this is extremely important for them to hear.
Yeah, always important to look out for the charlatans, that old snake oil salesman notion, that concept still exists out there. And these individuals, and I'm not specifying anyone in particular, but we know that there are individuals out there who will prey upon families who are desperate for answers. And they'll give you pseudoscience, and they'll give you, complete false information if it means that they're going to make a quick buck. I'm not saying that's what Arpad Vass does, but I do appreciate that Javier does go down these rabbit holes, and I do appreciate the digging deep pun that you used with the grave detector comment.
Yes. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
I hope everyone enjoys this conversation with Javier Leiva. Make sure to check out his stuff at pretendradio.org. And we're going to take a quick break for a commercial, and we'll be right back with Javier. Javier Leiva, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Man, I'm great. I was actually looking at when we last spoke, which was a year ago. I cannot believe that, man. It was a year ago. Wow. Yeah, in January. So over a year ago. But it's good to be back on Crossface, man.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you back. Thanks a lot for joining us again. It's just me and you today. No Lance. This episode, we'll have him back soon, I'm sure. But we wanted to talk about your show and one of the latest series you did. But before we get too deep into any particular series, I'd like to know a little bit about you and your show. Tell us what's your background and what's your show?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, my name is Javier Leiva. I host the Pretend podcast. I actually host 3 podcasts because apparently podcasting is addictive. So I host Pretend, Criminal Conduct, and the Ponzi Playbook. But I got into podcasting, especially true crime, because I used to be a TV journalist. I used to be a photojournalist, and I got out of it, and I missed telling stories. And one day I was talking to my cousin, who turns out that he was a con artist, and he was telling me about all his crimes before he was going to be sent off to federal prison. And my jaw dropped. I just couldn't believe it. And that's when I realized, oh yeah, this podcast is about con artists, people pretending to be someone else. And man, we're like 16 seasons in already. And I've had a few blockbuster cases, some cases that people know me by. I once was invited into a cult. Did a bunch of episodes on that. I exposed Frank Abagnale, the guy from Catch Me If You Can. So some people might know me from that one. And recently I worked on the Stalker case. 12 episodes.
Yes.
Well, originally it was 12 episodes. This is probably like 20 now, but I released this episodes. I sent them to the Phoenix PD. A couple of days later, the grand jury indicted the people I was interviewing for 6 felonies combined. It was a crazy story. So yeah, I've gotten myself into some hairy predicaments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I want to ask a little bit about that. I know you sort of wrapped up the Cyberstalker series recently, and I know that you've talked about it a lot, and even in your episodes, you're like, oh God, not again.
Oh, I know the story that won't go away, but people love it. People love it. It's just that they haven't lived it as long as I have. So
yeah. Oh, I get it. Yeah, no, and I'm another one of your listeners who is just super into it. Like I can't.
Yeah.
It's a surreal story.
And it happened. It's finally over, but it was happening in real time. So I think that's what people were really jazzed up about, because it was it was really unfolding in real time. I almost was called as a witness into the trial. I mean, it was crazy, but yeah, it was such a rare opportunity to tell the story, because I was working on it for 2 years. I didn't tell anybody about it. I released it all at once, and then it just like was an avalanche of things that happened. So it's kind of fun to listen to it in real time.
Good. And so what's going on with the indictments now? Are they facing these charges?
Funny you should ask. So today's the 29th. 2 days ago, they were supposed to be in court. But of course, right after I booked my flight and hotel to go to Phoenix for the trial, they took a deal. So the subjects of the podcast, I don't want to give it away, but the subjects of the podcast, they took a deal. If they're going to be on probation, they're going to go through counseling. And if they're on good behavior, then all the charges go away. But I mean, you know, the whole story is a big whodunit. Like I'm curious if it would have gone to trial, because ultimately, I don't know who was the stalker in this scenario, but all my listeners have a theory. So,
right. Yeah. Wow. So yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. I urge all of our listeners to check it out, because it is intense.
Yeah. That's season 12. You'll like it. There's Reddit page threads about it. There's like an unofficial Facebook page about this case. It's definitely caught people's attention for sure.
Good. All right. Well, tell us about one of the most recent series you did, the series on the grave detector.
Yeah. So the grave detector, this was a story that's been on my to-do list for a while, but I heard about this famous anthropologist, forensic anthropologist. His name is Dr. Arpad Vass, and he worked at the famous body farm over by the University of Tennessee. He's very well. I thought he was pretty well respected in his field. I mean, he teaches currently at another facility where law enforcement, CSI agents, people who work in crime scenes, they take this 10-week course, and he teaches currently one of those weeks. But that's not what's interesting about the story. What's interesting about the story is the techniques that he uses to investigate some of his crimes. Let me show you one of them, or Tim. I almost called you Lance. You ready? This is one of the tools that Dr. Voss uses to find bodies. So many of you might recognize these as dowsing rods. You might call them witching rods or divining rods. And typically when you see these, you can make these out of coat hangers. I just got the extra fancy ones from Amazon. But you use these to find water. At least that's what they're known for. So you walk over, some land, and if the rods cross, there's water underneath there. That's the claim. Well, Dr. Voss says that you could also find dead bodies with these. And law enforcement, I spoke to detectives that took his course. I mean, these are seasoned detectives with 20 plus years experience they believe that, you could use these rods to find bodies. But that's not the strangest part. Yeah. I wish that were the strangest part. Dr. Voss also invented this device called the quantum oscillator. Okay. And the claim is that he could, let's say you have a missing hiker or a missing person or a child. he claims that if he takes, let's say, the mother or father's DNA, let's say fingernail clippings, and he puts them in this Faraday cage, which is a jar, and he screws it into his machine. And his machine has like these two antennas that kind of look like dowsing rods a little bit. And he claims that with this machine, he could find the missing person with 92% accuracy from up to 60 miles away if the conditions are right. So the way it works, hang in there with me, all right? So this is like a really respected forensic anthropologist. So people take him seriously. What he claims is that the DNA from your fingernails are similar enough to the DNA of the missing person. And DNA has crystals in it, which this is true, and crystals have a vibration. It's almost like the same way an electric guitar works. It vibrates. So if the DNA vibrates at the same frequency, he could find the missing person. That's the claim. And as silly as this sounds, a lot of victims' families have hired Dr. Vass. A lot of police departments are like, take this guy seriously, and he's getting involved in a lot of high profile cases, some of which are your audience would know, like the Casey Anthony case and so forth.
Right. And he first kind of broke onto the scene testifying in the Casey Anthony case. Is that true?
Yes. And in that case, he had another invention. You want to hear this one? So we talked about the dowsing rod. We talked about the quantum oscillator. But this one's actually a really interesting one. So he was trying to develop a machine called the Labrador. So the idea is that cadaver dogs have a really good sense of smell. They could detect a corpse or a body or human decomposition, right? So what if we could have a machine do the same thing, right? And so Dr. Vass has identified, or at least he claims that he has identified volatile organic compounds, which are basically gases that are emitted that have a unique, so like, let's say he has these volatile organic compounds. He says that if you have these volatile organic compounds, that means a person was there. That means a dead body was there. And so in the Casey Anthony case, he took this machine and he analyzed the volatile organic compounds that were in the trunk of the car. But there's a lot of problems with this idea. Even though it sounds plausible, there's a lot of problems with it. But yeah, I tried to keep that short, but man.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting when you look at figures who have these controversial sort of histories, and there are people who support them and people who don't. And it's hard to kind of guess which people are going to fall on which side. So in the series, you spoke with detectives, right? You spoke with an actual with a homicide, at least one homicide detective, Freddie Ponsa.
Yeah, I spoke with Freddie Ponsa, who has never used any of these techniques in his investigation. I've asked him, have you ever used the dowsing rods? Or obviously he hasn't used the quantum oscillator because it's a patented device, but there's only a couple of them around. And he hasn't used any of these things, but to him, none of this sounded crazy. Like to us, it sounds very unusual, but he's like, hey, why not use these dowsing rods if they could help locate a body? Like, what's the harm? So what's concerning to me is that this is like questionable science, and law enforcement are considering using these tools in investigations. And what if by using these tools, you're actually taking time and resources away from real investigative techniques?
Yeah, it's hard to see how dowsing rods are really going to help. I understand, I know it started with water, but do they work on like the intention of the person holding them?
Yeah, so let me tell you something, man. I almost want to give these away for Christmas because it's a lot of fun. I've been using these around the house all day. Oh, and for those of you listening, can I describe a dowsing rod?
Sure.
It's just It's just metal. It's just like a L-shaped metal that you hold with your hands, and it has a straw so the rods can move freely. And if they cross, that's when you find something. Well, I mean, I could put a dog bone, one of my dog's bone right here, like in the middle of the carpet, and it will cross right when I get to that bone. I could go outside, I have a creek in the backyard. It will cross every time I go to the creek. It is really kind of a weird effect, because when these detectives go out and they try the dowsing rods at a body farm where there's an actual body or a piece of bone or whatever, it crosses almost every time. And the reason that happens, they call it the iodometer effect. And the iodometer effect is the same phenomenon that happens with the Ouija board. Whenever you're playing the Ouija board, it seems like the piece is moving on its own. Well, it's almost like the power of suggestion. So every time you walk with these dowsing rods over a bone or a body of water, you don't think you're moving it, but you really are. And that's what's happening. That's why it feels real, because it's like, wait a minute, I walked right over this bone and it crossed every single time. In the Up and Vanish case, Tara Reid's case, GBI, Georgia Bureau Investigation investigator, actually took dowsing rods into the courtroom and demonstrated in front of a jury with a bag of bones how this thing works. And of course it works. It's like a magic trick, right? If I take you, Tim, to a magic show and I saw a woman in half, I didn't really saw her in half. It's like an illusion, but it looks real, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm also wondering how Vass has a 92% success rate on the quantum oscillator. Like, wouldn't that imply that there were several different, like 20 or 30 or more of the sample size of bodies that he searched for and found most of?
And this is what's concerning about the whole thing, right? Because it's not 100%, it's not 90%, it's 92%, right? But where's he getting this number, right? And he cites an academic paper. Well, he sent me this academic paper. You know who wrote this academic paper? He did, okay? And he published it in a journal that looks like a pay-to-play type of journal where you pay and they'll publish your article. So has this quantum oscillator, the one that could find your dead loved one or missing loved one for up to 60 miles away, 92% accuracy. Has anybody else tested this? He says, oh yeah, others have tested it, but are they his friends? Are they like searchers, or are they other scientists who have independently tested it in a lab? No, to my knowledge, it has not been independently tested. And as long as that's the case, it's hard to take any of his claims seriously.
Right. But on your series, you spoke with a guy, Mike Hadsell?
Yeah.
Hadsell of Peace River Canine.
Yeah.
And he's used it, right?
Yeah, he actually has a quantum oscillator. He's one of the few people who do. And look, Michael Hadsell, he's a canine search and rescue guy. And he's not a scientist, right? So it's like, I think that in order to take this credibly is for somebody who is not connected to Dr. Vass, replicate this device and say, yeah, sure, it works. Because it's really interesting. I looked up the patent, and I did not post this on my show, but I looked up the patent. And when you patent something, you reference other people's patents, right? And he references other people's patents. And I contacted some of those scientists that invented other things that were kind of similar that use, and I ran it by them and they're like, it's plausible. It's plausible, but plausible is not real. Plausible is plausible. You have to really test it in order to know it's not junk science.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors. And now we're back to the program. Right. And so did you kind of get the runaround when you started trying to research this story? And I know you tried to get a hold of Dr. Vass. I'll just call him Arpad. You contacted him, but What happened when you initially contacted him?
When I contacted him, he forwarded my email to Michael Hadsel, who you were talking about earlier. And Michael Hadsel is kind of like his spokesperson, because Dr. Vass, if you listen to him, he has a bit of a speech impediment, and he's also weary of people like me, people who are in the media, because he has been written about in the past, and it wasn't favorable coverage, So he's like, and you could see in the email, he goes, "Hey, can you talk to this guy? I've been burned by podcasts in the past." I could see the email thread. And so I talked to Michael Hadsel, and we had a great conversation. And I think, I earned his trust, and I said, "Hey, do you mind putting me in touch with Dr. Vass again?" And Dr. Vass agreed at one point to the interview, but it was like 2 days before Christmas. And I think I must have gotten COVID or the flu or something. And I was just like, "Can we just do the interview after the holidays?" And that was a mistake. I should have just done the interview, because he had agreed to it. But by the time I circled back, he changed his mind. But he did communicate with me through Google Docs, so like I would ask him questions and he would respond. So he did communicate with me that way.
Did you find him to be dodgy in that way?
His responses were like, "Well, see this paper," the paper that he wrote. He would always refer back to this paper, but the paper has no raw data in it. So like all it does is it has these wild claims, but you know what I mean? So I don't know if he was dodgy. And the impression that I get from Dr. Vass is that I think he truly believes that this stuff works. Like, I don't think that he's trying to pull a fast one on us. Maybe he is. I don't know. But everybody I've talked to says that he's very sincere.
So with most of the subjects of the series that you cover, do you find that to be true, that the intent of the person is actually true, or that they're intentionally deceiving people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually got not hate mail, but like, an email from a listener saying, "Hey, this story doesn't really fall under the pretend theme. Like, well, who's the pretender here?" Well, to answer your question, I think that a lot of con artists start with good intentions. So like Elizabeth Holmes started off with great intentions. I mean, if her invention were to work for real in real life, that would be a game changer, right? So I think she kind of started with good intentions, and then the fraud happens when you realize it doesn't work and you keep pushing it. Okay. So in the case of Dr. Vass, I already on my show, I featured many cases where he's worked on these cases, and he claims that he detected the human remains of all these missing people, but there's no body. There's no proof that I know of. So if unless there's like a success story that I'm unaware of, if this is like failure after failure after failure after failure, and he's still pushing this thing as real, yeah, I mean, it's not for me to call fraud, but it's up to the listener to know, or actually better yet, it's up to the victim's family to make that decision. Am I giving this guy money? Is he legit, or is he fraud?
Right, because that's who ultimately is getting victimized here, or re-victimized here, right? If a victim's family or the family of a missing person is, paying to get Vass to a location to do a search using his, devices, is that like a logical thing to do, or is that like faith taking over?
Oh, it's totally faith taking over, because God forbid something were to happen to one of my family members, but if it did, I could only imagine that I would do anything possible to find them. And if I've exhausted every resource with law enforcement, I mean, law enforcement's only going to help you for so long, and then maybe you could hire a private investigator to do some work. But if they come up short, I mean, I could see why a family would try this, because why not, right? Why not try it? The problem is that it's almost like hiring a psychic at that point. Are you wasting your money? I mean, if this is how you want to spend your money, that's fine. But like, are you really going to get the results you want? I don't know. And it's kind of tragic, really.
Yeah, it really is. It's kind of a complicated issue because, you can't blame a family for trying something unorthodox and again, back to what you were talking about before, like with Elizabeth Holmes, like if this did work, like why no one would tear him down. Like I would love for these devices to all work.
Oh, I would love it to work too. That'd be awesome. Here's another thing. But the thing that bothers me is a 92% accuracy, right? So it's like, that's where, you're saying a 92% accuracy, and then that means that the chances are you're going to actually find my loved one from as long as we're in the, like in the vicinity, you should be able to find this person. And that's where, like, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. But I forgot where I was going with this because, that it's like false advertisement almost.
Yeah. Now, what about Vass's other peers in forensic anthropology, I guess? How do they feel about Vass and his reputation?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like he's very isolated from the professional community. He's not a member of any professional societies or anything like that. If you talk to an anthropology, professional anywhere, they'll probably tell you that this is junk science. Like they just don't buy it at all. But it's the people who are close to him, the people that he works with, think it's plausible. But that's the problem. I did this whole episode because of this on junk science. A lot of forensic techniques that we think are real are not. They were developed by law enforcement, and so not real scientists, right? So bite mark analysis, blood spatter, things that probably you and I have reported on and thinking that they were facts are not backed by science. And so if you believe that blood spatter evidence is accurate, and if you believe that, that you could bullet analysis is real. If you believe these things, then you're probably going to consider what he's doing to be within the realm of possibility.
Right. Has he helped resolve any missing persons cases with his inventions that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, no. And it's been a couple of weeks since I've looked at this, but I don't think I came across anything that, for instance, not with the quantum oscillator that I know of. The Gina Hall case is the only thing I could think of, and he did not find the body or anything. I think they found bone fragments maybe. But in the Gina Hall case, Gina Hall's sister really believes that this thing works. And she hired Dr. Vass, and they went to the killer's house, and they used a quantum oscillator, and they were looking underneath the floorboards, and they found a bunch of dead flies, and he was getting a ping from that area. Well, I mean, if you find fly carcasses and wings and stuff like that, you should be able to find a bone, right? If the fly hasn't decomposed, then surely there should be a bone down there or something. And he came up short as far as I know. But if you ask Gina Hall's sister, they were able to find these VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, and a bone fragment. But yeah, not that I know of. It's a short answer.
No shame on religion. I think whatever gets someone through is great. But I'm curious, do you think that being religious has anything to do with sort of having the faith to go along with Vass and an unlikely invention like this?
I do believe that some people are more conspiracy minded than others. Some people believe more in fringe ideas than others. Whether religion is part of that or not, I don't know. But let's say you believe the COVID vaccine was engineered to manipulate us, or I don't know, just things that are outside the norm. If you subscribe to those beliefs, then I think that this kind of falls within that zone. I do believe that you could be a medical doctor, you could be a scientist, and still believe in fringe ideas, Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's happening here. It's like a Venn diagram of like you're in science and you're in cuckoo land, and like somewhere in between is where he's at.
What happened when you corresponded with him via email? I guess did he ultimately what did he say to you?
When we corresponded, I mean, he said that he's like, I guess when he agreed to it the first time, he didn't know what my show was about, and I think that, but I guess after you look at the show and you realize that I talk about deception and con artists, I think he realized that, hey, I don't want to be on your show and defend the fact that I'm not a con artist, because he doesn't see himself that way, and I'm not calling him a con artist. I'm just saying that's what my show is about. And so that I think that's what kind of put the kibosh on the interview.
Do you ever worry about the legalities of the show that you're doing?
Yeah, I worry about a lot of things, man. We're both independent podcasters. Okay, this is our team. You're looking at it, right? It's like, I don't have, a team of lawyers and stuff like that. And part of that, I think that's kind of what makes my show kind of cool, because I'm sure if I ran any of my investigations by a lawyer, they would probably be like, don't do it.
Right.
But I think here's the thing. As long as I do my due diligence and I do my research and I try to present everything as factual as possible, yeah, you could sue anybody for anything. Okay. But at the end of the day, if I really had to go to court, I think my work stands on its own and I would be fine, right? But it's I don't want to go to court part, But
yeah.
And another thing, I also worry about my safety a lot. That's another concern, because I do go after people. Like I always tell my wife, if I end up dead somewhere, there's a long list of suspects out there. Just look at my podcast feed.
Yeah, I hear you there. Can kind of relate a little bit. It's like which person could it be? I don't know. Got to go through the back catalog.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what are the chances that the quantum oscillator is used without Vass and it's approved and it's used by police in the future?
Once you introduce something, it's kind of like you can't put the genie back in the bottle type of thing. If law enforcement buy into this thing, they think it's real. Okay. And it is patent. I mean, it's a real thing. It's just whether it works or not is what's in question, right? But if law enforcement thinks this is real and they use it in an investigation, and then that case goes to court and they accept that evidence, then all of a sudden it's a real thing, whether we want it to be or not, because once it's accepted in one case, and it could be used over and over and over again. That's how we ended up here with all the junk science that we have to begin with. So yeah, wow. It's a real thing. I think it really could be a thing. What's funny? I put the patent, I put it in ChatGPT. I said, ChatGPT, analyze this patent. And ChatGPT went and analyzed it. And I said, tell me, do you think this device works? And even ChatGPT was like, no, this is bullshit. But I was like, okay, well, if it doesn't work for finding missing people and human remains, then what is it good for? And then, it was telling me, well, it's probably a really good metal detector, or, and even that, like ChatGPT was struggling. They're like, I don't know. The experts that I was talking to, they're like, it's just a toy. It's not good for anything, really.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. So with a product out there, and I'm pretty sure you may have come across this product and this inventor and the son of the inventor, Jared Bradley, and the MVAC, right? I don't know if you've heard of this device. He's at CrimeCon, and he usually brings an MVAC with him, and it's kind of like a wet vac device that is able to get DNA off of like clothing or even a rock in one case, where, it isn't able to, you're not able to do that normally without a device like that. He has a whole presentation. The presentation is extremely impressive. He travels around to police stations. He tries to sell these. It's been used in court several times. Just like when I picture Vass and this quantum oscillator, I want to believe it, but I really need something like what happened with MVAC, like someone who's very public facing, who's doing presentations about it specifically, not forwarding emails about, that you also wrote, like that doesn't really have any true data in there. You need a demonstration.
Well, I mean, what you're saying is that if you're too scared to talk to a podcaster, then what's going on there, right? Like stand behind your machine is what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, I would need a lot more than that, than a good salesman. I actually think it makes it extra dangerous, right? Because then you have somebody that's really persuasive, trying to sell you this, snake oil. But yeah, I mean, I don't know much about Jared, right, and his machine. I haven't researched it, but I mean, it's interesting. And like, I don't think that we should be automatically dismissive anytime somebody has something very unusual and like thinks outside the box. All I'm saying is that let's just test it. Yeah. Like if it really works, it should work under controlled conditions and blind tests and all that jazz. Like I would say, let science take its course.
Right, and we're all rooting for it. To be clear, like again, if you're in the position that we are, covering cases and things like that, like this could potentially solve every missing person's case ever.
Right, if it worked.
So yeah, the implications are huge if it actually works.
Right, but I asked a forensic scientist. I said, if Dr. Vass's quantum oscillator really worked, like let's just assume it worked for a second, how significant of a scientific breakthrough would that be? And he's like, it would be one of the most spectacular inventions of all time. Because could you imagine? I mean, you could find missing people. You could find anything really with DNA. I mean, it would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what's hard for folks like us to believe it. Right? When DNA was introduced in the O.J. Simpson trial, the jurors, they weren't able to accept it because it was kind of mind blowing at the time.
Right.
So maybe there's something like that happening here, but again, we need testing to actually know.
Could you just for a second imagine if this thing worked? Like I read somewhere that he says that he could stand outside the White House with Joe Biden's DNA and find exactly where in the White House Joe Biden was standing. I don't know if he said that or somebody else said that, but I'm like, it got me thinking. I'm like, well, what if privacy concerns, right? Like I'm going to go look for Tim and I'm going to find him, or like a cheating wife goes, or like a cheating husband, the wives are like driving around town, like,
right.
Like, but it doesn't work, but could you imagine if it did?
Yeah, that would be pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Well, Javier, what else is coming up on Pretend?
I'm working on a couple of cases. There is one case that I'm working on. It's a sextortion case, but it's almost like a sex exploitation case where this I'm guessing it's a guy. The suspect is going after women in the Kansas area, and what he's doing is that he's hacking into their iCloud and stealing their nudes and posting it and harassing these women daily. And even when he doesn't have nudes of somebody, he'll create fake AI nudes of somebody and he sends them to their family, to their work. I mean, destroying these people's lives. And we're going to try to find this guy. Like, that's what I'm in the process of doing. I'm teaming up with the white hat ethical hacker that I worked with on the Stalker series. And we're going to see if we can find this guy.
That's fantastic. Wow. Keep us in the loop. That's incredible. I can't wait to hear that. When's that series out?
I have no idea, man. It's it's coming soon. I'm working on it. Good. I got a few things cooking. But yeah, that's one of the more interesting ones.
Very cool. All right. Well, I hope all of our listeners check out Pretend. Make sure to check out the Grave Detector series, but really check them all out because they're expertly produced and just super interesting stuff.
Well, thanks, Tim. It's always fun to talk with you, and hopefully I can talk to Lance next time. Maybe he'll forgive me because, he didn't want to be anywhere near me today. No, just kidding.
Thanks a lot for coming on, Javier.
All right, take care.